When I arrived in Paris to visit my son, my daughter-in-law, Matilda, told me he was away on a business trip. She didn't know that on that very night, I had heard his moans behind a locked door, and I knew her lie was only the beginning of a terrifying truth. Now, as I watch my son, Jean-Pierre, learning to walk again in this very garden, I know I have won. A year ago, I was just a worried widow in Provence when my son suddenly went silent for 6 months. I had to go to Paris alone to confront Mathilde, his beautiful young wife, and uncover a horrifying truth hidden behind the walls of Villa Montagne. It all started with a letter returned with a cold message, "Return to sender." My life, as Émilie Dubois, was simple. I lived alone in a small house in Provence, my days passing slowly with embroidery and the lavender garden in front of my porch. My greatest joy was the weekly calls from Jean-Pierre, my only son. He was a talented architect living in Paris, the pride of my life. But for the past 6 months, that peace had been shattered by a terrifying silence. It began with unanswered phone calls. At first, I told myself he was busy, but then, the letters I wrote also went unanswered. Last week, on his birthday, I had carefully sent him a hand-embroidered card, a small gift that had taken me a month to complete. Yesterday, it was returned to my mailbox, crossed out with a cold red ink line next to the machine-printed words, "Return to sender." Return to sender. Those 3 words were like a dagger to my heart. How could my son be returned to sender in his own home? My heart felt heavy, and a feeling of unease I had never felt before began to rise, cold and unyielding. That night, I couldn't sleep. A mother's intuition told me this wasn't about being busy. This was something far worse. The next morning, I made my decision. I couldn't sit here and wait in anxiety anymore. I had to go. I packed my bags quickly. My luggage was simple, with nothing but a few old clothes, the scarf I had embroidered with lavender, and, most importantly, an old photo of my son and me, framed in a small silver frame. It was a photo from the day Jean-Pierre graduated from college, his smile radiant and full of hope. I took the earliest train to Paris. The journey lasted for hours, taking me from the peaceful lavender fields of Provence, through lush green countryside, and finally into the hustle and bustle of the capital. When I stepped out of the Gare de Lyon station, I felt overwhelmed. The tall buildings rose up, blocking out the sky. A crowded stream of people rushed past me. The honking of cars, the sounds of laughter, the cries of vendors, all merged into a chaotic, alien symphony. I stood there, a country widow, lost in this vast city, clutching the strap of my old handbag. But fear would not deter me. I had only one goal: to find my son. I had to know the truth behind his silence. I gave the taxi driver Jean Pierre's address. The car drove through busy boulevards and finally stopped in front of an impressive building, Villa Montagne. I recognized it from the photos my son had sent me. The tall, black iron gate was silent. Behind it was a neatly trimmed but seemingly cold and lifeless garden. I paid the taxi driver, pulled my small suitcase to the gate, and rang the bell. After a long moment, there was a click, and the gate slowly opened. A young woman appeared at the main door. She was tall and thin, wearing an elegant black silk dress. Her golden hair was perfectly styled in a bun. It was Mathilde, Jean-Pierre's wife. She looked even younger and more beautiful than in the photos. But when her eyes met mine, looking me up and down, I didn't see a hint of warmth, only coldness and an undisguised look of contempt. "Mrs. Dubois," she said, her voice even, without a hint of surprise. "I didn't expect you to come." "Is Jean-Pierre home, dear?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm sorry, he's not home," Mathilde replied immediately, without a moment of hesitation. "He's on an important business trip to Berlin. Perhaps he forgot to let you know." The answer was too quick, too smooth. "A business trip? You've come a long way," she continued, with forced politeness. "Please, come in and rest for a bit before you head back." She didn't invite me into the main hall. Instead, she led me into a small, dark drawing room for visitors, then disappeared, leaving me alone in the silence and coldness of the villa. I sat on the velvet sofa, feeling the loneliness wash over me. The villa, despite its magnificence, had a strange, empty quality. I looked around. The walls were covered with abstract art, expensive but soulless. There were no family photos, no architectural sketches that Jean-Pierre used to be so proud of. There was no sign that my son truly lived here. After a while, Mathilde returned, carrying a cup of herbal tea. "He'll be gone for about a week," she said, placing the teacup on the table, her voice still cold and unconvincing. "You should catch the evening train back to Provence. There's nothing for you in Paris." It was a polite dismissal. As I took a sip of tea, a maid glided past the door of the drawing room. She wore a gray uniform and moved without a sound, like a ghost. When she caught a glimpse of me, she started and quickly lowered her head, hurrying away. Not a greeting, not a smile. "I think I'll stay for a night," I said, putting the teacup down. "The long journey has made me a bit tired." Mathilde shrugged, a gesture of annoyance. "As you wish. There's a guest room at the end of the hall." That night, I lay in the unfamiliar room, unable to sleep. The coldness of this house, the emptiness, Mathilde's unconvincing lie, and the fearful look in the maid's eyes. All these disjointed pieces came together to form a terrifying picture in my mind. A mother's intuition once again screamed at me. Something terrible was happening right behind the walls of this villa, and my son was at the center of it. The next morning, I decided not to stay in my room. I had to find out for myself. I left the drawing room and began to walk along the wide, cold corridors of the villa. In a hidden corridor at the back of the house, reserved for staff, I met an elderly man carefully dusting an antique cabinet. He wore an old butler's uniform. His eyes, when he saw me, showed obvious worry, but unlike the other servants, he didn't avoid me. "Hello," I said softly. "You are?" "I am Pierre, ma'am." "The butler of this house," he replied, his voice low and a little tired. I looked him straight in the eyes, a pair of eyes that had witnessed many things. I decided to get straight to the point. "Mr. Pierre, my son, Jean-Pierre, where is he?" Mr. Pierre's body stiffened. He stopped dusting, his face becoming tense. "Ma'am, I can't say." "You can't? Or you're not allowed to?" I asked again. He didn't answer. Just then, footsteps echoed at the end of the hall. Mathilde appeared. Her eyes were sharp as knives, sweeping from me to Mr. Pierre. "Mr. Pierre," she said, her voice cold. "Is your work not done yet?" "I'm working on it, ma'am," Mr. Pierre replied, quickly bowing his head and resuming his dusting. All connection between us was severed. Mathilde stood there, arms crossed, watching until I turned and left. But I had seen what I needed to. I had seen the fear in Mr. Pierre's eyes, and I knew he held a part of the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. The brief encounter with Mr. Pierre haunted my mind. I decided to take a risk. When the entire villa was silent, I crept out of my room and went towards the kitchen. Just as I had hoped, Mr. Pierre was there, sitting alone at an old wooden table, drinking a cup of coffee. Seeing me, he started, and quickly stood up. "Mrs. Dubois, you shouldn't be here." "Mr. Pierre," I said, my voice a whisper, filled with urgency. "Please, I just want to know the truth. Is my son okay? Where is he?" He looked towards the door, his face full of worry. "The mistress will be very angry if she sees you here." "I won't leave until I know my son is safe," I said, my voice firm. I looked at him more closely. "How long have you worked here, Mr. Pierre?" "Ma'am, I have been the butler of this villa for over 30 years, since the old owner's time," he replied, his voice a little nostalgic. "I was here when young Jean-Pierre and the new mistress moved in." I looked at him, hoping to find a hint of sympathy. "Then, you must see that my son, Jean-Pierre, he is a good person. He is not someone who would disappear for 6 months without a word to his mother." Those words seemed to have reached him. He sighed, a heavy breath. "Sit down," he whispered, pulling a chair out for me. When I sat down, he looked at me, his voice lowered to a level that was almost inaudible. "Young Jean-Pierre is not on a business trip, ma'am." My heart sank. He had an accident, a very serious accident, nearly 6 months ago. 6 months. Exactly the time he had fallen silent. He was badly injured, and... "He's not very well," Mr. Pierre continued, avoiding my gaze. The mistress brought him back here to take care of him. He is in a room in the West Wing. The mistress doesn't allow anyone to visit, not even the staff. Only she and a private nurse. He paused, then looked at me with a warning in his eyes. Be careful, Mrs. Dubois. This house is not what it used to be. The new mistress. She is very different. I sat there, in the cold kitchen, and felt a shiver run down my spine. My son was right here, in this very house, imprisoned after a serious accident, and his wife was hiding everything. I knew I wouldn't leave Paris. I wouldn't go anywhere until I found the truth behind that locked door. Mr. Pierre's words kept repeating in my head, giving me no peace. The West Wing. I had to go there. That night, I waited until the clock struck 2 in the morning, when the entire villa was deep in sleep. I tiptoed out of my room, my bare feet on the cold marble floor. The darkness in the wide corridors seemed to thicken, swallowing every sound. I went towards the west wing of the villa, an area I had never been allowed to go. The corridor here was narrower and darker. Most of the doors were closed silently. But then, I saw it. At the end of the hall, there was a large oak door, looking completely different from the others. And on it, there was not a normal doorknob, but a large steel lock, gleaming under the moonlight that filtered through a small window. My heart pounded. Why would a room in the house be locked with such a large lock? And then, I heard it. A very small, faint sound, coming from inside. A moan. Then a whispered, broken, incoherent sound. I held my breath, pressing my ear against the cold wooden door. The whisper came again, a little clearer this time. It was a faint, hoarse voice, but I recognized it. It was Jean, Pierre's voice. My son was right behind this door, locked up, and he was in pain. A surge of fury and fear rose in me at the same time. I had to get inside, at any cost. Just then, a figure suddenly appeared at the end of the corridor. I turned around, startled. It was Mr. Pierre. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be here," he whispered. "If the mistress finds out." I heard him, Pierre. I cut him off. "You have to help me." Mr. Pierre looked at the locked door, then at me, his face full of conflict. "I can't." "But," he hesitated. "Every night, after checking on young master, the mistress usually leaves the key on a hidden hook behind the wine rack in the pantry. She thinks no one notices." He added, "The nurse who takes care of the young master is named Therese. She usually goes to the back garden for a cigarette at exactly 10 in the morning." He had given me 2 clues, but could I trust him? The next morning, I decided to try. At exactly 10 o'clock, I went to the back garden. I saw a young woman in a nurse's uniform standing under an oak tree. It had to be Therese. I walked closer, beginning my act. I told her about a mother's sorrow, about being prevented from seeing her son, seeing the genuine despair in my eyes. Her face seemed to soften a little. "His condition is very bad, ma'am," Therese finally admitted. "He's very weak and often vomits. And his condition seems to always get worse. Right after the mistress comes to visit, and personally gives him his herbal tea. Poisoning." The thought was crystal clear. I thought I had an ally. But that evening, as I was tiptoeing towards the pantry, I heard voices coming from Mathilde's room, the door ajar. It was Mathilde's voice, and Therese's voice. "She believes me now," Therese said. "She thinks I'm on her side." I told her part of the truth, about the symptoms, just as you asked. "Good," Mathilde's cold voice replied. "Keep gaining her trust. Report every action to me. You won't be short of money." I stood frozen in the darkness of the corridor. An ally? Number. That encounter was just a trap. Even Mr. Pierre, who had told me how to approach Therese, was probably just a part of this play. In this house, I couldn't trust anyone. I was completely alone, and I knew that if I wanted to save my son, I had to act on my own. Therese's betrayal was a heavy blow, but it also gave me a ruthless clarity. I could no longer hope for pity or help from anyone. I had to find the evidence myself. That night, I didn't hesitate anymore. I tiptoed down to the kitchen, into the cold pantry. Just as Pierre had said, The key to the West Wing was hanging on a hidden hook behind the wine rack. My heart pounded, but my hand was steady. I took the key, but I didn't go to Jean-Pierre's room because I knew that breaking in there right now was too dangerous. Instead, I went somewhere else, Mathilde's office. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside, enveloped by darkness. In the faint light from my phone, I began my search. I wasn't searching aimlessly. I was looking for things that could prove a conspiracy. In a locked drawer, I found what I needed: a massive life insurance policy for Jean-Pierre, with the sole beneficiary being Mathilde, signed just a few weeks after his accident. Next to it were invoices from a Swiss pharmacy for a strange medicine I had never heard of. But the most horrifying discovery was at the bottom: a file of clippings from old newspapers. All of them talked about the accidental deaths of Mathilde's two previous wealthy husbands. One died from falling down the stairs, the other from food poisoning. Both left her a huge fortune: the Black Widow. The three words appeared in my head. My son was not her first victim. I took photos of everything with my phone. But I knew this was not enough. I needed to know who the accomplice was. And I thought of Caleb, Mathilde's shady brother whom I had met once. The next day, I made an excuse to go for a walk and took a taxi to Caleb's office address, a small investment company. Taking advantage of the lunch break, I sneaked into his office. And there, on his unlocked computer, I found the last pieces of the puzzle: fake contracts, records of money transfers from Jean-Pierre's account to his company, and emails exchanged with Mathilde about solving the problem quickly. Everything was clear. This was a perfectly planned conspiracy to seize assets and perhaps to murder. After having enough evidence of Mathilde and Caleb's conspiracy, I still felt there was a missing piece. Why would Jean-Pierre, an intelligent and sharp architect, fall so easily into their trap? I decided I had to get into the room in the West Wing. That night, I took the key again and tiptoed to the end of the corridor. This time, I put the key in the lock. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the room was dark and smelled of medicine. On the large bed, my son lay there, thin and weak. He was sleeping, his breath heavy. I stepped closer, tears welling up. I didn't dare to wake him. I just sat silently on the chair next to the bed, looking at him. And then, my eyes landed on a small notebook on the bedside table. I carefully opened it. It was Jean-Pierre's diary. The last lines were written in a shaky hand, almost unreadable. "Mother," it wrote, "if you are reading these lines, it means you have found me. I'm sorry for being silent. I know everything." My heart stopped. I knew about her plan from the beginning. I knew about the medicine in the tea, but I couldn't do anything. She threatened me. She said that if I resisted, if I called the police, she would find a way to harm you. She knew you were my only weakness. So, I chose to be silent. I chose to endure, hoping that one day there would be an opportunity. Every day I try to fight, not for myself, but to protect you. The notebook fell from my hand. My tears fell profusely. And then, a truth even more horrifying than the murder plot became clear in my mind. Mathilde didn't kill him right away. She was too cunning for that. A sudden death would be thoroughly investigated. Instead, she chose a more cruel method. She kept him alive, but in a state of living death, completely incapacitated. By doing so, she could play the role of a devoted wife while slowly siphoning off his assets, forcing him to sign transfer papers that no one would suspect. A natural death from illness would happen after everything had been transferred. My son, the child I thought was a helpless victim, was actually a silent hero. He didn't give up. He fought in the only way he could. He endured all this pain, alone, just to protect me. I looked at my son lying on the bed, my heart aching but also feeling a rising strength. I would not let his sacrifice be in vain. I would get him out of here. After that horrifying night, I knew I couldn't act alone. I only had one person I could trust, though with a little hesitation: Mr. Pierre. The next morning, I met him in the garden tool shed, the only place without security cameras. I told him everything: about the insurance policy, about the dead husbands, about Jean, Pierre's note, and about Mathilde's slow poisoning plot. After listening, Mr. Pierre's face changed from worry to outrage. "I have suspected for a long time," he said, his voice low. "But I had no proof. Ma'am, I will help you. For young Master Jean-Pierre, and for this house." Our plan was meticulously drawn up. First, we needed undeniable evidence. That day, while cleaning, Mr. Pierre cleverly managed to get a sample of the herbal tea that Mathilde prepared for Jean-Pierre. I secretly took that sample to a private lab, disguising it as a normal tea sample. The results came back 2 days later, just as I feared. It contained a small but steady dose of oleander extract, a poison that causes heart failure. Our opportunity came on the weekend. Mathilde and Caleb had an important meeting with investors in the suburbs of Paris and would be away all day. Mr. Pierre, with his experience as a longtime butler, knew exactly how to disable the security camera system and motion sensors in the West Wing for a short time without triggering an alarm. At noon, when the nurse Therese was having lunch, we acted. Mr. Pierre and I rushed into Jean-Pierre's room. My son was awake then, but very weak. "Mother," he whispered, his eyes filled with tears when he saw me. "Hush, my son," I said, my voice full of determination. "I'm going to get you out of here." At the same time, a private ambulance, arranged by the lawyer Moreau, was silently parked at the back gate. We helped Jean-Pierre, who was emaciated and almost strengthless, out of the room. Every step was an extraordinary effort, a race against time. As we just got Jean-Pierre into the car and closed the door, I saw Mathilde and Caleb's car approaching from a distance. They had returned earlier than expected. "Go!" I urged the driver. The ambulance sped away, heading to a discreet private clinic in the suburbs, where a medical team was ready. I had saved my son, but the battle had only just begun. Mathilde's reaction was faster than I thought. The morning after we escaped, she reported to the police, but she didn't report him missing. She accused me, Jean, Pierre's mother, of having kidnapped my own son. She appeared on television, tears in her eyes, performing a perfect act. She spoke of a mentally unstable mother-in-law, jealous of her son's happiness, who took advantage of Jean-Pierre's serious illness to kidnap him to seize his assets. She used my silence over the past 6 months as evidence, saying I had cut off all contact with the family. All of Paris seemed to believe the story of the pitiful young wife. But while Mathilde was busy with her play, we were working in secret. At the clinic, doctors performed a series of tests. The results confirmed the worst. Jean-Pierre was suffering from chronic poisoning by oleander extract, a poison that slowly accumulated in his body. They said my son would need a very long time to recover. With the test results and Mr. Pierre's testimony, the lawyer Moreau officially filed a complaint against Mathilde and Caleb with the prosecutor's office. The real war had begun. Mathilde's lawyer tried to turn the situation around, claiming that I had poisoned my own son to frame my daughter-in-law. But he hadn't anticipated what I had found. At the hearing, Mr. Moreau presented everything: the massive life insurance policy, the pharmacy invoices from Switzerland, the shady money transfer records from Caleb's office, and the final blow, the file on the accidental deaths of Mathilde's 2 previous wealthy husbands. When the old newspaper clippings were projected, when the name the Black Widow was uttered, I saw Mathilde's confident face crumble. Her play was over. Immediately after the hearing, an arrest warrant was issued. Mathilde and Caleb were arrested for conspiracy to murder and fraud to seize assets. That day, I sat in the interrogation room, trembling but resilient, recounting my entire story to the police. From the return to sender letter, the trip to Paris, to what my son had written in his notebook, the battle was over. Justice had spoken. After the trial, I took Jean-Pierre out of Paris. We returned to Provence, to the fresh air and peace of the lavender fields. I bought a small country house right next to mine, so he could begin his recovery. Mr. Pierre, after retiring, volunteered to live with him to take care of him, along with a young, kind nurse. The months that followed passed slowly. Jean-Pierre had to relearn everything, from holding a spoon to walking again. But little by little, life returned to him. His shaky legs became steadier. His weak hands were able to hold a drawing pen, and most importantly, the smile returned to his lips, a sincere smile, no longer overshadowed by the worries of the glamorous world. One afternoon, we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the lavender field purple. "I was wrong, Mother," he said, his voice still weak but clear. "I was so busy chasing the luxuries of Paris that I forgot that true peace is right here. The love of family and home is worth more than any villa." He turned to look at me. "Do you know, in the darkest days in that room, when I couldn't move or speak, I could always feel your presence. I knew you were out there, looking for me." That thought alone gave me the motivation to keep fighting. A tear rolled down my cheek. His sacrifice was not in vain, and my struggle was not either. Mathilde and Caleb received long prison sentences. The empire they built on deceit had collapsed. As for us, we had found our lives again. Every afternoon, Jean-Pierre and I walked together on the small dirt path between the rows of lavender. "This place is so peaceful, Mother," he said on one of our walks. I smiled, taking his hand. "This is home, my son. This will always be your home." We walked together under the sunset, towards a future no longer stormy, but filled with peace and hope.